A baker wipes flour from his forearms, ducks into the cramped courtyard of a wool merchant's house, and sits down next to a Roman centurion. When they read the commands of the text, they read them in a vacuum, as if the authors are asking them to simply try harder. The kiss is not a polite, cultural greeting. It is the physical manifesto of a new humanity. They are doing the impossible. They are looking at the people society has systematically discarded, and they are pulling them into the center of the room. They are sharing their grain during a famine. They are burying each other's dead. They are proving that a different kind of kingdom is breathing right under Caesar's nose. But to hold this radical equality together, Paul has to use a word that makes modern readers flinch. It is a military word. It is a word of absolute conquest. And he drops it right into the middle of his letter to the Ephesians. To a modern reader, the word submit feels inherently dangerous. It is a word loaded with centuries of abuse, manipulation, and institutional control. We hear the command to submit, and we immediately imagine a loss of agency, a silencing of our own voice beneath the heavy boot of someone else's ego. We recoil from it because we have seen it weaponized by the powerful against the vulnerable. But you have to read the text in the language it was written. In his letter to the Ephesians, right before Paul addresses the notoriously hierarchical relationships of marriage, parenting, and slavery, he issues a blanket command to the entire congregation. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 21. He looks at a room full, in the quiet of their own minds. But if you look closer at the actual grammar circulating in those first-century courtyards of radically unequal people breathing the hyper-competitive air of the Roman Empire, and he tells them to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. The word your English Bible translates as submit here is the Greek verb hupotasso. It is a compound word pulled directly from the dust of the ancient battlefield. The prefix hupo means under, and the root tasso means to arrange in an orderly fashion. In classical Greek literature, it was a strictly military term. It was used to describe a troop division voluntarily organizing itself under the command of a leader, falling into rank so the heavy bronze shields would interlock and hold against an enemy charge. You see the exact same military root in Luke chapter 7. When a Roman centurion looks at Jesus and says, "I am a man placed under authority hupotasso," knowing exactly what it means to align his physical body within a rigid chain of command. But Paul takes this top-down, hierarchical military word, and he bends it sideways. He attaches it to allelon, submit to one another. That single grammatical collision changes everything about how power operates in a Christian community. Submission is not the forced subjugation of the weak by the strong. It is the voluntary lowering of the strong for the sake of the whole. When Paul commands them to hupotasso, to allelon, he is telling them to voluntarily place themselves beneath the needs of the person sitting next to them. He is demanding that the wealthy merchant yield. You find something that completely shatters the modern concept of private religion. The commands of the New Testament are not a mirror. They are a web to the wisdom of the day laborer. That the citizen prioritize the physical well-being of the foreigner. You do not just tolerate the people in your local church. You actively arrange your life to support their flourishing. Like soldiers locking their splintered wooden shields together in the mud to protect the man on their left. It is a posture of mutual, desperate dependence. But this kind of radical, mutually assured survival demands a level of commitment that most modern people find entirely repulsive. Because 2,000 years later, we have replaced the shield wall with a transaction. You drive to a building on a Sunday morning. You park your car in a massive asphalt lot. You walk through glass doors and grab a paper cup of lukewarm coffee. You sit in a dark room and feel the bass vibrate through the floorboards. You watch a professional band. You listen to a polished speaker. You slip out to your car during the final song to beat the traffic. You evaluate the experience on the drive home. If the music feels outdated, you complain. If the sermon is too long, you check your watch. If the people in the lobby irritate you, you switch to a different service time. If the theology pushes too hard against your politics, you find a new building entirely. This is not a community. It is a spiritual transaction. There is a specific phrase hiding in plain sight in the Greek text. It is a two-word collision. It appears 59 times as a direct. You are treating the bride of Christ like a streaming subscription. You pay your tithe. You donate your attention. You expect a religious product in return, but you never actually arrange yourself under anyone. You never hold the rough linen towel. You never let anyone see the dirt on your own feet. The 59 Allelon commands cannot breathe in this environment. Read the list again. Comfort one another. Instruct one another. Admonish one another. Forgive one another. Every single one of these verbs requires aggressive, uncomfortable proximity. They require a collision of lives. They demand that your Tuesday evening is interrupted by someone else's crisis. They demand that your bank account takes a hit for a brother's medical bill. They demand that your carefully curated emotional boundaries are breached. You cannot bear burdens you refuse to touch. You cannot confess your darkest sins to people whose last names you do not know. You cannot outdo one another in honor when you are only looking at the back of someone's head. You cannot carry a stretcher if you refuse to grip the rough wood. You cannot weep with those who weep through a pixelated screen. You cannot spur one another on to love and good deeds if you only see each other for 60 minutes a week. The Christian life was designed to be abrasive. It was designed to sand off your sharpest edges through the relentless, exhausting grinding of human relationship. Non-negotiable command. 59 specific, practical instructions on how to live out this new reality. And here is the detail that makes modern readers so uncomfortable. When you pull yourself out of the gears, you stop the formation. You stunt your own growth to save your own comfort. We have designed a version of faith that protects us from the exact friction Jesus said would purify us. We traded the terrifying vulnerability of the upper room for the sterile safety of the auditorium. We engineered the inconvenience out of the kingdom. We wanted the crown without the basin. But the New Testament writers had a specific noun for the reality we abandoned. It is a word that goes far beyond simply sharing a room, and it demands a level of sacrifice that most of us have never been asked to give. Look at the first letter of John, chapter 1, verse 7. The apostle is an old man now, writing with thick, dark ink on a scrap of rough parchment to a network of house churches that are fracturing under pressure. Believers are walking away from the gritty, irritating reality of physical community in favor of a private, enlightened mysticism. They want the spiritual high without the human friction. And John writes this: if we walk in the light, not a single one of these 59 commands can be obeyed alone. If you try to isolate yourself and follow the way of Jesus, as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another. The word your English translation renders as fellowship is the Greek noun koinonia. In modern church culture, we hear the word fellowship and we immediately think of bad coffee in a basement, a polite potluck dinner, or awkward small talk in a crowded lobby. But in the first century Mediterranean, koinonia was a hard, binding business term. It meant a joint venture, a legal partnership where the capital, the labor, and the ultimate risk were distributed equally among the shareholders. It stems from the root koinos, meaning common or shared. If a merchant ship sank in a storm, sending a cargo of grain and heavy clay amphoras of wine to the bottom of the sea, the koinonia meant every partner took the financial hit together. You did not just share the profits, you absorbed the devastation. You see the exact same word operating when Paul writes to the Philippians. He does not thank them for their polite friendship. He thanks them for their koinonia in the gospel. He is thanking them for the tangible, financial, and physical partnership that literally kept him from starving while he sat in a freezing Roman prison. The heavy iron chains cutting into his wrists. They put their own lives on the line to supply his needs. That root changes everything about how we read John's instruction. You will immediately hit a mathematical wall. You can pray alone. You can fast alone. You can study the text alone. Fellowship is not a social hour. It is a shared survival. When John anchors koinonia directly to the Allelon commands, he is insisting that my spiritual, physical, and emotional standing is fundamentally bound up in yours. You cannot claim to walk in the light while ignoring the brother bleeding out in the dark next to you. If your ship goes down, my cargo is lost too. The 59 commands are simply the practical outworking of this intense koinonia. When the text commands you to carry another person's burdens, it is because their collapse will inevitably bring down the structure you are both standing on. You instruct one another because the ignorance of one shareholder jeopardizes the entire enterprise. You forgive one another because resentment is a slow rot that will eventually eat right through the hull of your shared vessel. But this radical, demanding interdependence is not just an arbitrary set of rules designed to make human beings behave better. There is a reason the text forces us together, and it goes far deeper than human survival. Jesus kneels with a clay basin in the upper room, and the king does the work of a slave. A patrician and a laborer break bread on the same stone floor, and 1,000 years of imperial hierarchy is dismantled. But you cannot obey the primary ethic of the New Testament in an empty room. 59 times. The text absolutely demands the physical. Irritating. Beautiful. A believer confesses a dark failure across a dimly lit room, and the stones of judgment are replaced by the immediate application of grace. A congregation voluntarily arranges itself under the needs of the weak, and the heavy shield wall holds against a hostile culture. An apostle freezes in iron chains in a Roman cell, and a distant church risks its own survival to send him bread. A merchant ship sinks into the Mediterranean Sea, and a community absorbs the devastation so a brother does not drown alone. A fractured, deeply flawed people refuse to walk away from the table, and the invisible God becomes visible to a watching world. Same impossible standard. Same radical love. But maybe the part that stays with me most is the rough linen towel. The mandate to love is not an abstract theology. It is a physical piece of fabric, wrapped around the waist of God, wiping the literal dirt from the feet of the man who was carrying 30 pieces of silver in his pocket. If you are in a season where you have been deeply wounded by a local church, where the friction of community feels more like a slow death than a shared survival, the command to submit and bear with one another probably sounds exhausting. Presence of someone else. To feel the weight of this impossible standard, you have to start not with the letters of Paul. The temptation to retreat to a private, sterile faith is intoxicating. But isolation is a luxury the New Testament does not offer. The text does not ask you to find perfect people. It asks you to pick up the basin for flawed ones, trusting that someone is holding a towel for you. If this opens something in you about what it actually means to be the church, subscribe and leave a comment. Even one word helps. Share this with someone who is fighting to stay planted in their local community. Pray for us as we keep digging into these ancient texts. And may the God who knelt on a hard floor to wash the feet of his betrayer give you the courage to stay in the room, to lock your shield with the person beside you, and to carry a weight you were never meant to hold alone. But with the exact moment this pattern was born, you have to step into another rented room. The stone floor is cold against his sandals. The olive oil lamps are smoking in the damp evening air, casting long, erratic shadows against plaster walls on a night when the air was thick with betrayal, right before a king picked up a basin of dirty water. Look at the Gospel of John, chapter 13, verse 3-4. The smell of roasted lamb and stale wine still hangs in the upper room. Jesus looks at a table of men who are about to abandon him, men whose feet are still damp from the basin, and he hands them the blueprint for the next 2,000 years of human interaction. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. The phrase translated one another in your English Bible is a single Greek word, allelon. It is a reciprocal pronoun, a grammatical marker that implies a mutual, back and forth exchange. It is the linguistic equivalent of two mirrors facing each other, reflecting the light infinitely. Across the entire New Testament, allelon appears exactly 100 times, 59 of those times. It is attached to a direct imperative verb, a command. The writers of the New Testament took this single word from the upper room and weaponized it against the hyper-individualistic culture of Rome. Paul uses it in Romans 12 to say, outdo allelon in showing honor. Peter uses it in his first letter to command. Show hospitality to Allelon without grumbling. James uses it to demand, confess your sins to Allelon. The heavy wooden door is bolted shut. They do not look like a family. They do not share a native dialect, a tax bracket, or a bloodline. We read these verses today sitting in padded pews or listening to audiobooks on our daily commute, filtering the ancient text through a culture that prizes self-sufficiency above almost everything else. We are a species haunted by isolation, constantly searching for belonging while fiercely protecting our autonomy. We think of Christian love as an internal emotional disposition, a warm feeling we manage in our own chests, a private vertical connection between our minds and the divine. But the grammar of Allelon refuses to let you keep your faith private. The Christian life is not a solo marathon. It is a three-legged race run on a crowded street. If you are not constantly bumping shoulders with someone else, you are not actually running. When you lay out all 59 commands on a table, you realize that roughly a third of them are simply variations of Jesus's original mandate to love. But the remaining 2/3 of the list get uncomfortably specific. They demand that we bear one another's burdens, forgive one another, instruct one another, comfort one another, and admonish one another 59 times. The authors force the believer out of their own head and into the messy, irritating reality of a physical community. The early church was not a social club you attended. It was an organism you sustained. Under the rigid hierarchy of Roman society, a patrician and a laborer should not even be eating bread in the same room. But what makes this 59 count list so shocking is not just the volume of the commands. It is the sheer, uncomfortable practicality of what exactly this mutual exchange requires when the oil lamps burn low and people actually start rubbing against each other. Dust coats their ankles. The roads of Jerusalem are dry, choked with festival crowds and animal waste. The upper room is stifling. 13 men recline around a low table. No servants wait in the corners. No water has been poured. The tension is heavy, unspoken, pressing against their chests. Someone should take the basin. No one moves. Jesus stands up. He strips off his outer garment. He wraps a rough linen towel around his waist. He pours water into a clay basin. The splash echoes in the silent room. He kneels on the hard floor. He takes a calloused, filthy foot in his bare hands. He washes the grime away. He wipes the skin dry. He scoots across the floor to the next man. Peter pulls his feet back. Peter protests the inversion of the cosmos. Jesus does not stop. He washes the feet that will run away. He washes the feet that will stand by a charcoal fire and deny his name. He washes the feet of the man with 30 pieces of silver heavy in his pocket. He finishes. He puts his clothes back on, let alone breaking it from the same loaf. And yet, a thick parchment scroll is unrolled on a low table, and a voice begins to read. He sits down at the table. He looks at their clean skin. He delivers the mandate. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. Allelon. Wash Allelon. The wash basin is not a symbol for abstract humility. It is the literal posture of the new kingdom. Love in the New Testament is never ethereal. It is tactile. It has dirt under its fingernails. It smells like sweat and damp wool. It requires a towel. When Jesus anchors the 59 commands to a basin of dirty water, he destroys the illusion of clean religion. You cannot serve humanity in theory. You can only serve a specific person in reality. You must touch the parts of their life that have been walking through the mud. You must lower your head below their knees. You must take their dirt onto your own hands. This is the precedent for the entire list. Every time Paul says, bear with one another, he is pointing back to the basin. Every time Peter says, clothe yourselves with humility toward one another, he is remembering the rough linen towel. Every time John writes, love one another, he can still hear the water splashing in the clay bowl. They watched God do the work of a slave. They watched the king scrub the filth of the traitor. They cannot unsee it. It happens here in Rome. It happens in the chaotic port of Corinth. It happens in the mountainous terrain of Galatia and the wealthy estates of Ephesus. So, when they plant churches across the Mediterranean, they do not ask for perfect people. They ask for people willing to hold the towel. But water only washes skin. What happens when the friction moves from dirty feet to broken trust? What happens when the Roman world crashes into this fragile new community and the offenses pile up? The basin is the baseline. But the real test of Allelon is about to demand something much harder than water. The heaviest words in the Greek language are often the ones that require us to absorb an offense. When you read the 59 Allelon commands, a startling theological reality begins to take shape. The apostles did not expect the local church to be a sterile, utopian gathering of perfected saints. They fully anticipated that believers would constantly irritate, disappoint, and deeply wound one another. And we know this because of the sheer volume of instructions, dedicated solely to managing human friction. Consider the commands to bear with one another, forgive one another, and confess your sins to one another. You do not need a command to bear with someone who is easy to love. You only need a command to bear with when someone's personality grates against yours, when their theological opinions make your jaw clench, or when the sheer heat of their ego burns the people around them. A pattern emerges in these letters that circulate through the underground empire. The same specific phrase is repeated again and again. The Greek word often used for bear with, anekomai, literally means to hold up against, to endure the physical weight of something that threatens, to crush your spine. These commands are not a naive expectation of harmony. They are a survival manual for inevitable conflict. If realizing that the biblical text is far more demanding and far more grounded in human messiness than a polished Sunday service is stirring up questions you've never considered, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe. Because every week, we go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. So the early believers step out into a hostile empire, equipped with instructions designed for the exact moments when they want to walk away. Look at the command in the book of James to confess your sins to Allelon. In the ancient world, vulnerability was a fatal liability. You did not hand your rivals the ammunition to destroy your reputation or your livelihood. Yet James demands that believers look across a dimly lit room, strip away their carefully constructed public image, and name the darkest, most shameful failures festering in their own minds. This requires a level of safety that is almost alien to our modern sensibilities. A space where the raw exposure of guilt is met not with stones hitting the dirt, but with the immediate application of grace. When Paul writes to the Colossians, he tells them to forgive one another, to people who have zero sociological reason to be sitting in the same room. Most people assume the New Testament is primarily a book about individual salvation, as the Lord has forgiven you. The grace is not meant to stop at the individual believer's chest. It is meant to flow out horizontally to the person who just betrayed their trust. We tend to think of forgiveness as an internal therapeutic process, a way to release the toxic resentment, pooling in our own stomachs so we can feel better. But the New Testament frames it as a communal necessity, the only mechanism that keeps the fragile web of relationships from snapping under the pressure of human failure. The New Testament does not command us to find a flawless community. It commands us to bear the weight of a flawed one. But how did these ragged, flawed communities actually function when they walked out of their house churches and onto the ruthless streets of the Pax Romana? Because the empire outside those doors operated on a completely different set of rules. The sun rises over the marble columns of Ephesus. The streets flood with bodies. A wealthy patron walks to the forum. Clients trail behind him in the dust. They carry his ledgers. They loudly praise his lineage. They hope for a handful of copper coins. The Roman world runs on a strict, ruthless currency. Power flows down. Obligation flows up. Slaves lower their eyes when spoken to. Women stay in the shadows of the household. The weak are crushed beneath the wheels of imperial progress. The hierarchy is not a social custom. They read the letters of Paul, Peter, and John as private instruction manuals, a personal checklist for a private relationship with God. It is the bedrock of the empire. But a heavy wooden door opens on a side street. A wealthy merchant steps inside. A slave covered in dockyard sweat follows him. A widow with flour on her hands enters behind them. The door swings shut. The iron latch drops. The Roman rules evaporate in the dark. The master does not sit at the head of the table. The slave is not ordered to pour the wine. They sit in a circle on the hard floor. They break the same crust of bread. They pass the same clay cup. The merchant looks the slave in the eye and asks for forgiveness. The widow teaches the scriptures to the educated businessman. This is not a slight cultural shift. It is social treason. The 59 Allellan commands dismantle the Roman pyramid brick by brick. Honor one another above yourselves. Greet one another with a holy kiss. Serve one another. Be kind to one another. In Rome, you only serve the person who holds the sword. In Rome, you only honor the person who can buy your loyalty. But in this dimly lit room, the currency has completely changed. When Paul commands them to greet one another with a holy kiss, he is blowing up 1,000 years of class division. A patrician kissing a day laborer on the cheek. A Jew embracing a Roman centurion.